The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council sparkled under artificial starlight as beings from across the galaxy hurried to their seats. This was no ordinary meeting. Emergency sessions like this happened maybe once every 100 years, and today, every species that mattered had sent their top representatives. Ambassador Li Jiho walked slowly to the human section, his black diplomatic uniform standing out against the colorful robes and natural armor of the other delegates. He could feel thousands of eyes watching him, hear the worried whispers that followed his every step. Some delegates actually moved away when he passed, as if he carried some invisible disease. The human section was completely empty, except for his single chair. Just 3 months ago, humans had been welcomed guests at these meetings. Now they sat alone, isolated like dangerous animals in a zoo. Speaker Vorthak climbed onto the central platform, his insect-like legs clicking against the crystal floor with each step. His species, the Korthani, had been running these council meetings for over 2,000 years. Nothing rattled them, but today even Vorthak's usually steady voice had a nervous edge. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Vorthak began, his translator converting his clicks and buzzes into words everyone could understand. "We face a situation that threatens everything we have built together. The incident at Kepler 442 has forced us to reconsider our relationship with our newest council members." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. Some delegates nodded their heads, others made sounds of agreement in their own languages. Li Jiho sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, watching everything with calm brown eyes. "General Thexler of the Krillian Defense Force will present her findings," Vorthak announced. The general stepped forward, her battle-scarred armor telling the story of countless victories across the galaxy. The Krillians were known as the best fighters in space, their military tactics studied by every species with dreams of conquest. If anyone understood warfare, it was General Thexler, but today she looked shaken. The lights dimmed and a huge holographic display filled the center of the chamber. What appeared made even the bravest delegates gasp in shock. Floating in the cold darkness of space was a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered starships. Pieces of once mighty vessels drifted like leaves in an autumn wind. "This is what remains of the Zephyrian Third Fleet," General Thexler said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Until yesterday, they controlled the shipping lanes around Kepler 442. They were 237 ships strong, with crews totaling over 50,000 trained soldiers." She paused, letting the image sink in. Several delegates shifted, uncomfortably in their seats. The Zephyrians had been bullies, yes, but they were strong bullies. Everyone knew their fleet was nearly impossible to defeat. "The engagement lasted 3 hours and 42 minutes, the general continued. "When it ended, this was all that remained. Every single Zephyrian vessel was destroyed or disabled. Their admiral escaped in a damaged shuttle with maybe 30 survivors. The chamber was so quiet you could hear the gentle hum of the life support systems." General Thexler's multiple eyes slowly turned toward Li Jiho. They were defeated by 12 human ships. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then, like a dam breaking, voices erupted from every corner of the chamber. Delegates shouted questions, made accusations, demanded explanations. Some called for immediate action, others for investigation. A few species representatives actually stood up and started walking toward the exits. Through it all, Li Jiho sat calmly in his chair. When the noise finally died down enough for him to be heard, he simply nodded once and said, "General Thexler's report is accurate." That was it. No excuses, no explanations, no apologies. Just confirmation that 12 human ships had somehow destroyed a fleet that should have been impossible to beat. "I call for an immediate vote," shouted Ambassador Krelthon from the Altarian section. "Humanity must be classified as a Class X military concern under Emergency Protocol 7. The vote was swift and decisive. Every species voted yes, their fear overriding any political considerations. Every species except one. When they called for the human vote, Li Jiho simply said, "The human delegation abstains." As the session ended and delegates hurried away, whispering in worried groups, Li Jiho remained in his seat. He knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy had finally seen what humans could do when pushed too far, and nothing would ever be the same again. Admiral Vexthul sat in what was left of his command chair, surrounded by sparking control panels and the groans of a dying starship. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion looked like a war zone, which it had been just hours earlier. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow over everything, and the smell of burned circuits filled the recycled air. His hands wouldn't stop shaking as he activated his personal recording device. This would be his final report as commander of the Zephyrian Third Fleet. After today, there was no fleet left to command. Personal log Admiral Vexthul, stardate 2387.156, he began, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. I am recording this aboard the damaged flagship Eternal Dominion, the sole surviving vessel of what was once the most powerful fleet in this sector. He paused, watching through the cracked viewport as debris from his destroyed ships drifted. Past like metallic snow, each piece represented hundreds of lives lost, friends and comrades he would never see again. The humans, he continued, struggling to find the right words. They don't fight like any species we've encountered. When we detected their convoy near the disputed mining world of Kepler 442, we followed standard galactic engagement protocols. These protocols have kept the peace for over 1,000 years. The Admiral's mind drifted back to the beginning of what should have been a routine territorial dispute. The Zephyrians had claimed mining rights to Kepler 442 first, but the humans had arrived with their own survey ships and begun setting up operations. It was the kind of conflict that happened dozens of times each year across the galaxy. We approached their formation with our full fleet, Vexthul remembered. 237 ships in perfect battle formation. We transmitted our claim to the system and demanded they withdraw immediately. This is how civilized species handle these matters. You show your strength, make your demands, and usually the weaker party surrenders or negotiates. A medic walked past carrying a wounded officer, reminding the Admiral of the price they had all paid for underestimating the humans. Their response was immediate and completely unexpected. No communication, no negotiation, no surrender. They didn't even acknowledge our transmission. One moment we were waiting for their reply, and the next moment they were attacking. Vexthul closed his eyes, trying to push away the memory of that first terrible moment when everything went wrong. I've been fighting battles for 30 years, he said quietly. I've seen every kind of military tactic, every type of coordination, but what the humans did was impossible. Their 12 ships moved like they shared a single mind, yet each captain made independent decisions that perfectly supported the others. But the worst part wasn't the tactical brilliance, though that had been impressive enough. It was the ruthless efficiency that still gave him nightmares. Their leader, Captain Park Minho, commanded a heavy cruiser called the Soul's Pride. When our formation tried to surround them, he did something I've never seen in all my years of service. He turned his own ship into a weapon. He accelerated directly toward our center formation and rammed his vessel straight through our defensive line. The Admiral's voice cracked with emotion as he remembered watching the human ship tear through, his carefully arranged fleet like a knife through silk. While Park Minho sacrificed his ship to break our formation, the other 11 human vessels targeted our engines with surgical precision. Not our weapons, not our shields, but our engines. They wanted to leave us helpless, unable to escape or maneuver. What happened next was the part that would haunt Vexthul for the rest of his life. The humans hadn't been fighting to capture territory or negotiate a better position. They had been fighting to eliminate every single Zephyrian ship in the system. In 3 hours and 42 minutes they destroyed my entire fleet, he whispered. Ships that had served with honor for decades, crews that had families waiting for them at home. All gone. The Admiral looked around his damaged bridge, won. More time, then spoke his final words into the recorder. To whoever finds this log, understand this. The humans don't fight wars the way we do. When they decide you're their enemy, they don't want to defeat you. They want to erase you completely. Dr. Morwin rubbed her tired eyes and leaned back in her chair, surrounded by holographic displays showing battle data from every possible angle. She had been studying the Kepler 442 engagement for 3 straight days, and each hour of analysis only made the situation more disturbing. The Centaurian Strategic Institute's war room hummed with activity as military experts from across the Galaxy tried to understand what they had witnessed. Colonel Kethmar paced behind her, his scaled hands clasped tightly behind his back. The veteran Krillian officer had fought in 17 major conflicts during his career, but nothing had prepared him for what the humans had accomplished. "Show me the formation analysis again," he requested, his voice tense with concentration. Dr. Morwin's neural interface flickered as she pulled up the tactical display. The battle unfolded in slow motion, each human ship marked with a different color as they moved through space. What should have looked like chaos instead revealed an almost artistic pattern of coordination. "Watch this part carefully," she said, highlighting a specific moment in the engagement. "The humans are outnumbered 20 to 1, surrounded by Zephyrian ships on all sides. Any reasonable military force would either surrender or try to escape." The display showed the 12 human vessels suddenly changing direction simultaneously, moving with perfect timing, as if they had rehearsed this exact scenario hundreds of times. "They coordinate like a hive mind," Dr. Morwin continued, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "Every ship knows exactly where the others will be, what they're planning to do, how they'll react to enemy movements. But look closer." She zoomed in on individual ships, showing their specific actions during the battle. Each human vessel was fighting its own unique battle, using different tactics and making creative decisions that no central commander could have planned. "Each ship maintains complete individual tactical creativity," she explained. Captain Park Min-ho's suicide run through the Zephyrian Center wasn't planned by some master strategist. He made that decision in the moment, and somehow the other 11 captains instantly understood and adapted their own strategies to support him. Colonel Kethmar stopped pacing and stared at the display. In all his years of military service, he had never seen anything like it. Most species could achieve either perfect coordination or individual creativity, but never both at the same time. "The psychological warfare component is what disturbs me most," he said quietly, calling up another section of the battle data. "The humans did something I've never encountered in civilized warfare." The display showed communication frequencies during the battle, highlighting several broadcasts from the human ships. Dr. Morwin enhanced the audio, and suddenly the war room filled with voices speaking in Earth's various languages. "They broadcast their casualties to the enemy," Colonel Kethmar explained, his voice heavy with distaste. "When Captain Park Min-ho's ship was destroyed, his crew's final communications were transmitted on open channels. The Zephyrians were forced to listen to dying human soldiers giving their last messages to loved ones back on Earth. The psychological impact had been devastating. Zephyrian intercepts showed their crews becoming increasingly demoralized as they realized they weren't just fighting ships, but killing individuals with families and dreams. "But here's what truly terrifies me," Dr. Morwin said, pulling up the most disturbing analysis of all. "The humans adapted their tactics 3 times during the engagement, not before the battle, not after reviewing what went wrong, but in the middle of active combat." The display showed the progression of human strategy throughout the fight. They had started with conventional space combat tactics, then shifted to ramming attacks when surrounded, and finally evolved into precision strikes against specific ship systems. "Mid-battle evolution," she whispered. "They learned from their mistakes and their successes in real time, adjusting their entire battle plan while enemy weapons were firing at them." Colonel Kethmar studied the data with growing alarm. The implications were staggering. If humans could adapt this quickly during their first major space battle, what would they be capable of after years of experience? According to power output, readings and weapon deployment analysis, Dr. Morwin continued, the humans were operating at approximately 60% of their ship's maximum capabilities. They were holding back. The war room fell silent as the full meaning sank in. This devastating defeat of the Zephyrian Third Fleet hadn't even represented humanity's full military potential. They had been restraining themselves while simultaneously destroying one of the galaxy's most feared naval forces. If this was humanity with restraint, Colonel Kethmar said slowly, what would they be like if they decided to stop holding back? Neither of them wanted to find out. Intelligence Director. Caxel Thorpe hadn't slept properly in weeks. His office was filled with stacks of data crystals, holographic displays, and translation matrices, as he dove deeper into humanity's past. What had started as a routine background check on the galaxy's newest species had become the most disturbing investigation of his career. His chromatic scales, usually a calm blue-green, had been shifting between dark purple and black for days. In Galaxian culture, these were the colors of deep fear and existential dread. His staff had started avoiding him in the hallways. The inner circle of the Galactic Council gathered in the secure briefing room, their faces showing the same tension that had gripped the galaxy since Kepler 442. These were the leaders who really made decisions, away from the public debates and political theater of the main assembly. "Commanders," Xelthorpe began, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge, "my investigation into Earth's military history is complete. What I discovered changes everything we thought we knew about humanity." He activated the central display, and images began flowing across the screen. Ancient warriors with primitive weapons, massive armies clashing across barren fields, flying machines dropping explosive devices on cities below. "Humans have been at war for over 10,000 years, he said, letting that fact sink in. Not occasionally, not when resources became scarce, not when their population grew too large. Continuously. They have never known true peace." The assembled leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Most galactic species had abandoned large-scale warfare thousands of years ago, settling into the peaceful coexistence that the Council represented. The idea of constant conflict was almost incomprehensible. But here's what makes it truly disturbing. Xelthorpe continued, changing the display to show a map of Earth. They weren't fighting against alien invaders or some external threat. They were fighting themselves. Human against human, nation against nation, sometimes brother against brother. Images flashed showing the scope of human conflicts. Battles involving millions of soldiers, weapons that could level entire cities, strategies that required the coordination of entire continents. They developed something they call total war, the director explained, his scales darkening further. This means the complete mobilization of their entire society for conflict. Not just soldiers fighting soldiers, but every citizen contributing to the war effort. Their entire economy, their technology, their culture, all focused on one goal, defeating their enemies. Commander Threxler leaned forward, her battle-scarred face showing confusion. But surely they exhausted themselves, destroyed their own civilization? That's what any rational species would have done, Xelthorpe replied. But humans are not rational in the way we understand it. They fought these massive wars, then rebuilt, then fought again. Each time they became stronger, more efficient, more deadly. The display changed to show weapons that made the assembled military leaders gasp in horror. Massive missiles capable of crossing continents, bombs that could vaporize entire cities, biological weapons that could kill millions. They developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, Xelthorpe whispered. Multiple times over. They built enough destructive power to end all life on Earth, then pointed these weapons at themselves during something they called the Cold War. "Did they use them?" asked Ambassador Vorthak, his insectoid features showing disbelief. "No, and that's the most terrifying part." Xelthorpe's voice dropped to barely audible levels. They practiced restraint, not from weakness, but from understanding the consequences of their own power. They knew they could destroy everything, so they chose not to. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Humans possessed weapons of mass destruction, but controlled themselves through discipline alone. I interviewed their military leader, Captain Cho Sung, via secure transmission, Xelthorpe continued. He speaks of warfare as if it's an art form, a science to be perfected. He quoted philosophers who wrote about military strategy thousands of years ago, theories that are still being refined and improved today. The director brought up audio recordings of his conversations with various human military personnel, their casual discussions of tactics, their deep understanding of logistics and strategy, their ability to think several moves ahead in any conflict scenario. They've been preparing for galactic conflict for generations without even knowing it, he concluded. Every war they fought among themselves taught them something new. Every conflict made them better at the next one. When they finally reached the stars, they brought with them 10,000 years of accumulated military wisdom. The briefing room fell silent as the Council's inner circle absorbed this information. They had thought they were dealing with a young species taking its first steps into galactic civilization. Instead, they had encountered masters of warfare who had been practicing their craft since before most galactic species had achieved spaceflight. "What does this mean for us, Commander?" Threxler finally asked. Caxel Thorpe's scales turned completely black. "It means we're not dealing with newcomers learning how to fight. We're dealing with a species that has turned warfare into their greatest cultural achievement." Dr. Kethmore stood at the center of the packed council chamber, his multiple tentacles moving in nervous patterns that betrayed his usual calm demeanor. As the galaxy's most respected expert on alien psychology, he had studied hundreds of species over his long career, but nothing had prepared him for what he had discovered about human mental processes. The chamber was fuller than anyone had seen it in decades. Word had spread that the good doctor's findings would explain the mystery that kept everyone awake at night. How could humans be so effective at warfare while still appearing to be decent, moral beings? "Honored delegates, Doctor," Kethmore began, his neural crown pulsing with soft blue light that indicated deep concentration. "I have spent the past 4 months conducting intensive psychological evaluations of human military personnel. What I discovered challenges everything we thought we knew about the relationship between morality and violence." He activated his first display, showing brain scans and psychological profiles of various human subjects. The data streams were complex, but even non-experts could see the unusual patterns. "Humans possess a psychological trait that we have never encountered in any other species," he continued, his voice gaining strength despite his obvious nervousness. "They can compartmentalize extreme violence while maintaining their moral frameworks completely intact." The concept seemed impossible to most of the assembled delegates. In their experience, beings who were capable of great violence were either naturally aggressive predators or had abandoned their moral constraints entirely. "Let me give you a specific example," Dr. Kethmore said, bringing up a new display. "Lieutenant Kim Yuna was captured during the Outer Rim skirmish 3 months ago. During her interrogation, she showed genuine concern for her captors' welfare. She asked about their injuries, shared her food rations, and even provided medical advice for treating wounded prisoners." The chamber murmured with confusion. This sounded like normal, compassionate behavior from a civilized being. "However," the doctor continued, "our monitoring equipment revealed that throughout this entire period of apparent kindness, she was simultaneously planning the destruction of the detention facility and the elimination of her captors. Her brain showed no conflict between these two mental processes. She could genuinely care about individual enemies while planning to kill them if necessary." Several delegates made sounds of distress. The idea of such mental flexibility was deeply disturbing to species that saw morality and violence as mutually exclusive. Dr. Kethmore moved to his next finding, and his neural crown pulsed with deeper anxiety. "Their emotional bonding patterns are unlike anything in our psychological databases. They form connections with their military units that transcend normal pack behavior or family loyalty." He showed footage from the recent conflicts, focusing on human soldiers in combat situations. The images were difficult to watch, but they told an important story. Sergeant An Taiho threw himself on an explosive device to save his squad during the Battle of Vega 7, the doctor explained. "The remarkable thing isn't that he sacrificed himself for others. Many species show such behavior occasionally. What's remarkable is that this isn't unusual for humans. It's expected." The doctor's tentacles writhed more rapidly as he approached his most disturbing finding. "I interviewed dozens of human military personnel, from enlisted soldiers to senior commanders. They all shared a common trait that I find deeply unsettling. They process warfare as an intellectual puzzle to be solved. They enjoy the strategic challenge." He brought up audio recordings of his interviews, playing snippets of humans discussing military tactics. Their voices showed enthusiasm, excitement, even joy when talking about complex battle scenarios. "Listen to Captain Park Jin-ho describing the flanking maneuver at Kepler 442, Dr. Kethmore said, playing a recording. The human officer's voice was animated, almost artistic, as he explained how his unit had outmaneuvered a superior enemy force. Commander Lee Somin spoke about military strategy the same way our greatest artists discuss their masterpieces. The doctor continued. War isn't just something they're good at. It's something they find intellectually and emotionally fulfilling. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. Most species viewed warfare as a necessary evil, something to be endured when all other options failed. The idea that an intelligent species could actually enjoy combat was almost incomprehensible. In situ. Conclusion, Dr. Kethmore said, his neural crown now pulsing with deep purple light that indicated profound concern. We are dealing with a species that has evolved to be perfect warriors while maintaining their capacity for compassion, creativity, and moral reasoning. They are not monsters or mindless killers. They are something far more dangerous, ethical, beings who have made warfare into an art form. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed this terrifying revelation. They had hoped to find some weakness in human psychology, some way to predict or counter their military effectiveness. Instead, they had discovered that humanity's greatest strength in warfare came from their ability to remain fully human while fighting. The attack on the New Busan was supposed to be simple. The Mordak hegemony had been watching the growing fear of humanity spread through the galaxy, and their leadership decided they wouldn't be intimidated by these newcomers. The human colony ship was traveling alone through disputed space, carrying 10,000 civilian settlers to establish a new world on the outer rim. War Admiral Cortex of the Mordak fleet saw it as the perfect opportunity to show the galaxy that humans could be beaten. His battle group intercepted the colony ship near the Rigel system, demanding they surrender and submit to Mordak authority. When the New Busan refused, Cortex ordered the attack. The colony ship fought back with everything it had, but it was designed for transport, not warfare. Within 2 hours, the New Busan was destroyed, its 10,000 passengers and crew lost to the cold vacuum of space. Cortex transmitted the victory to Mordak Prime, expecting congratulations and praise for putting the humans in their place. Instead, he had just triggered something the galaxy had never seen before: human escalation doctrine. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called 72 hours later, but by then it was already too late. The Council's emergency response team delivered their report to a chamber filled with shocked and terrified delegates. At 0347 Standard Time, 3 Mordak worlds went dark simultaneously, announced Commander Vexlis, her voice barely steady. Mordak Prime, their capital world with over 2 billion inhabitants; Kethla, their primary military academy and training center; and Vexthul 7, their main weapons manufacturing facility. The holographic display showed the 3 star systems, each one now eerily quiet, where once there had been bustling civilizations. No communications, no ship traffic, no signs of life. The strikes were precise, coordinated, and devastating. Commander Vexelis continued. This wasn't random destruction or revenge bombing. The humans specifically targeted military installations, government centers, and strategic infrastructure. They didn't just retaliate for the New Busan. They eliminated the Mordak hegemony's ability to wage war entirely. General Thexler, still studying the tactical data from her command console, looked up with undisguised amazement and fear. The level of intelligence gathering required for this operation is staggering. Commander Han Ji-seok led the primary assault force, but the coordination involved ships from at least 6 different human fleets. She highlighted specific attack patterns on the display, showing how human forces had struck dozens of targets simultaneously across 3 different star systems. They somehow mapped every Mordak military installation, every government facility, every strategic resource center, the general explained. This information was gathered over months, possibly years, while the humans maintained perfectly peaceful, diplomatic relations with the Mordak government. The implications sent a chill through the chamber. While human diplomats had been attending trade negotiations and cultural exchanges, human intelligence operatives had been quietly cataloging every military asset the Mordak possessed. The attack was launched from staging areas that we didn't even know existed, General Thexler continued. Human ships appeared in Mordak space from directions we thought were empty. They must have been positioning forces and supplies for months, preparing for this exact scenario. Ambassador Drelthon from the Altarian Republic stood up, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic. They planned this entire operation before the New Busan was even attacked. They knew the Mordak would eventually test them, and they were ready. The chamber erupted in worried conversations as delegates realized what this meant. Humanity hadn't just responded to an attack. They had anticipated it, prepared for it, and used it as an excuse to eliminate a potential threat entirely. "The message is clear," whispered Ambassador Krelnoth, speaking for many in the chamber. "Attack one human ship, lose 3 worlds." But the truly terrifying part wasn't the scale of the human response. It was the precision. The Mordak military had been completely neutralized, but civilian casualties were surprisingly low. The humans had somehow managed to destroy an entire civilization's ability to make war while avoiding the kind of mass slaughter that usually accompanied such operations. This wasn't the random violence of an angry species seeking revenge. This was the calculated elimination of a threat by beings who understood exactly how much force was necessary to achieve their goals. As news of the Mordak defeat spread through the galaxy, one thing became clear to every species with military ambitions. Humanity didn't just fight back when attacked. They fought back so effectively that their enemies ceased to exist as military threats. The age of testing human resolve was over before it had truly begun. The great halls of the Galactic Council, which had echoed with unified voices for over 1,000 years, now buzzed with whispered conspiracies and fearful plotting. What had once been the galaxy's symbol of peaceful cooperation was breaking apart as species that had been allies for centuries suddenly viewed each other with suspicion. Destruction of the Mordak hegemony had shattered more than just 3 worlds. It had destroyed the comfortable illusion that the galaxy's balance of power would remain stable forever. Now every species was forced to ask themselves a terrifying question. What would they do if humanity decided they were a threat? In the Yaosi secure conference room of the Altarian Republic's embassy, Defense Minister Korthla paced back and forth like a caged predator. His scaled hide showed the stress patterns that indicated extreme agitation, and his voice carried the edge of desperation. "We cannot wait for them to grow stronger," he insisted, his claws clicking against the metal table as he gestured emphatically. "Right now, humanity is still confined mostly to their local star systems. They have maybe 50 colonies, 100 ships scattered across known space. If we act quickly, with enough allies, we might be able to contain this threat before it spreads." Around the table sat representatives from a dozen species, all sworn to secrecy, all united by their fear of what humanity might become. The Krillian military attaché nodded agreement, while the Centaurian trade delegate wrung her hands nervously. "The Zephyrians learned too late that peaceful coexistence with humans is impossible," Minister Korthla continued. "The Mordak found out what happens when you test their resolve. We have a narrow window of opportunity here, but it's closing fast." But not everyone in the galaxy shared this aggressive stance. In another part of the diplomatic quarter, Ambassador Vexenol of the Vegan Confederacy was holding his own secret meeting, and his message was completely different. "Madness," he said firmly, his blue-tinted skin flushing darker with emotion. "Absolute madness. Did any of you actually study what the humans did to the Mordak? 3 worlds, completely neutralized in 72 hours. And that was their response to losing 1 civilian transport ship." The Vegan ambassador called up a holographic display showing the precision of the human strikes against Mordak targets. The surgical accuracy, the perfect timing, the complete elimination of military capabilities while minimizing civilian casualties. "This isn't a species we can defeat through military action," Ambassador Vexnol explained to his gathered allies. "This is a species we need to understand, to work with, to find common ground with before they decide we're their enemies." His audience included representatives from the more peaceful species, those who had built their civilizations on trade and diplomacy rather than military might. They understood that in a galaxy where humans existed, survival would depend on being seen as friends rather than threats. Far above these secret meetings, In the cold depths of space between star systems, Captain Seo Minsu sat in the command, chair of the stealth ship Incheon. His vessel was invisible to most sensor systems, designed for reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. For the past 3 months, he and his crew had been monitoring communications throughout the galaxy, keeping track of how different species were reacting to humanity's growing reputation. The conversations he intercepted painted a clear picture of a galaxy dividing itself into 2 camps, those who wanted to destroy humanity before it became too powerful, and those who wanted to ally with humanity to ensure their own survival. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "we're picking up another encrypted transmission from the Altarian Defense Ministry. They're trying to organize a coalition of 12 species for what they're calling a preemptive security action." "Captain." Seo Minsu listened to the intercepted conversation, taking notes on which species were joining which faction. His job was to gather intelligence, not make policy decisions, but he couldn't help feeling a mix of amusement and concern at how scared the galaxy had become. "Forward everything to Earth Command," he ordered, then added his own brief analysis. To the transmission, "They're scared. Recommend we keep it that way." The message traveled through quantum communication networks back to Earth, where military planners studied the reports with great interest. The galaxy was reshaping itself around humanity's presence, and every species was being forced to choose sides in a conflict that might determine the future of galactic civilization. What had once been a unified galaxy, governed by peaceful consensus, was becoming something entirely different. A collection of nervous allies and potential enemies, all trying to figure out how to coexist with a species that had proven it could eliminate any threat with surgical precision. The ancient peace was dying, replaced by a new reality where humanity's mere existence had become the most important factor in galactic politics. Ambassador Lee Jiho walked slowly to the center podium, his footsteps echoing through the eerily quiet chamber of the Galactic Council. The usual buzz of conversation had died completely as delegates from across the galaxy waited to hear what humanity's representative would say. Everyone knew this might be the most important speech in galactic history. The past months had seen the galaxy split into factions, with some species planning preemptive strikes while others sought desperate alliances. Secret meetings, military buildups, and whispered conspiracies had replaced the peaceful cooperation that had defined galactic civilization for centuries, all because of fear of what humanity might do next. Lee Jiho looked out at the assembled delegates, his expression as calm and composed as ever. He had been humanity's voice in the galaxy for 3 years, watching as peaceful first contact had gradually transformed into something approaching a Cold War. Today, he would either ease those fears or confirm the galaxy's worst nightmares. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "Over the past several months, you have observed what you call humanity's military might. I stand before you today to correct a fundamental misunderstanding." The chamber remained silent, but the tension was almost visible. Representatives leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word. "What you have witnessed, the engagement. At Kepler 442, the response to the Mordak aggression, the tactical capabilities demonstrated in various conflicts, these represent our expeditionary doctrine, our exploration and diplomacy protocols." The words hit the assembly like a physical blow. Delegates began whispering frantically to their advisors, trying to process what they had just heard. If the devastating defeats of the Zephyrians and Mordak had been accomplished using exploration protocols, what did that say about humanity's actual military capabilities? Lee Jiho waited patiently for the noise to die down, his hands clasped calmly behind his back. When silence returned, he continued with the same measured tone. "Admiral Park Sun-ho of the Terran Defense Force has specifically requested that I share certain information with this assembly. Earth's actual military capabilities remain largely untested in space-based operations. Our focus since achieving faster-than-light travel has been peaceful exploration and diplomatic contact with other species." The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Several delegates actually stood up from their seats, their faces showing a mixture of disbelief and terror. The Altarian Defense Minister, who had been secretly organizing a coalition against humanity, looked like he might collapse. "The ships you encountered in battle," Li Jiho explained, "were designed for exploration, scientific research, and diplomatic missions. They were equipped with defensive systems appropriate for unknown space hazards, but they were never intended as weapons of war." General Thexler, the Krillian military expert who had been analyzing human tactics for months, made a sound of distress. If exploration ships could destroy entire fleets, what could purpose-built warships accomplish? Furthermore, the ambassador continued, his voice remaining steady despite the growing panic around him, our tactical doctrine emphasizes adaptation and evolution. We learn from each engagement, incorporating new strategies and countermeasures based on observed enemy capabilities. We adapt faster than you can respond to our adaptations. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The galaxy's military experts had been studying human tactics, trying to develop countermeasures and defensive strategies. Now they realized that by the time they implemented any defense, humanity would have already moved on to new approaches. "I want to be absolutely clear," Li Jiho said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "This is not a threat. I am simply providing information that I believe you should possess for future decision-making." The chamber erupted in panicked conversations as delegates tried to process this revelation. The species that had been planning preemptive strikes suddenly realized they had been preparing to attack a sleeping giant that hadn't even bothered to wake up yet. Those seeking alliances understood that they were dealing with a power far beyond their previous calculations. "Earth's position remains unchanged," the ambassador concluded. "We seek peaceful coexistence and mutually beneficial relationships with all species. We hope that this information will help inform your future policies and decisions." As Li Jiho walked back to his seat, the weight of his words settled over the assembly like a heavy blanket. The galaxy had been terrified of humanity's demonstrated capabilities. Now they learned that those capabilities represented merely the tip of an iceberg whose true size remained hidden beneath the surface. The age of galactic balance was truly over. In its place was a new reality, where humanity's restraint, rather than their aggression, had become the most important factor in determining whether galactic civilization would survive or collapse into chaos. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Li Jiho's shocking revelation to the Galactic Council, and the transformation of galactic civilization was complete. What had once been a loose confederation of equals had quietly reorganized itself around a new reality, humanity's unquestioned position as the galaxy's dominant military power. The changes hadn't come through conquest or intimidation. Instead, they had emerged from the simple recognition that the old ways of doing things no longer made sense in a galaxy where humans existed. Species that had been planning preemptive strikes now competed to offer the most favorable trade agreements. Former enemies sent diplomatic gifts and cultural exchanges, hoping to be seen as potential allies rather than threats. Captain Cho Seung stood on the observation deck of Proxima Station, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on the new Galactic Peace Enforcement Academy. The massive facility orbited between 3 star systems, strategically positioned to serve as a neutral training ground for military officers from across the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just months ago, these same species had been studying human tactics to find weaknesses they could exploit. Now they were sending their best and brightest officers to learn directly from human instructors, hoping to incorporate some of humanity's military wisdom into their own forces. Captain Cho called out his aide, Lieutenant Park Daiho. "The morning briefing is ready. We have 43 new students arriving today from 7 different species." Cho Seung nodded, reviewing the list of incoming trainees. Krillian war veterans, Centaurian strategic analysts, even a few Altarian commanders whose government had been planning to attack Earth just a few months earlier. Now they all sat in the same classrooms, learning human military doctrine and tactics. The Academy's curriculum covered everything from basic strategy to advanced psychological warfare. But the most popular course was something the instructors called escalation management. Students learned not just how to fight effectively, but how to calculate the precise amount of force needed to achieve their objectives without triggering larger conflicts. Meanwhile, In his research facility on Hayes, the Academy's lower levels, Dr. Kethmore was completing his follow-up study on galactic psychology. His tentacles moved in patterns of amazement as he reviewed the data from the past 6 months. "The irony is almost perfect," he observed to his research assistant, Dr. Vexithari. "Humanity's reputation for warfare has created the most peaceful era in galactic history. Not because they've conquered everyone, but because everyone is too afraid to start conflicts that might draw human attention." The statistics were remarkable. Territorial disputes that had simmered for decades were being resolved through negotiation. Trade wars that had disrupted commerce for years had ended with surprisingly generous agreements. Even the notorious pirate fleets of the Outer Rim had largely disbanded, unwilling to risk the possibility of human intervention. Back on Earth, life continued much as it always had. Children played in parks and attended schools. Their parents went to work and worried about mundane things like mortgage payments and career advancement. Most humans were only vaguely aware that their species had become the galaxy's unofficial peacekeepers. The human military, however, understood their new role perfectly. Admiral Lee Hyunwoo, recently appointed as Supreme Commander of Joint Galactic Forces, had accepted the position with characteristic Korean pragmatism. His office on Lunar Base overlooked Earth, reminding him daily of what he was protecting. On his desk sat a simple wooden plaque with a motto that had become the unofficial philosophy of human military doctrine: peace through strength, victory through restraint. The phrase captured something essential about humanity's approach to galactic politics. They had achieved dominance not by demonstrating their full capabilities, but by showing just enough strength to make everyone else very, very careful about provoking them. Admiral Lee Hyunwoo often found himself hoping that this delicate balance would continue. The galaxy had learned to coexist with humanity, but not through love or understanding. Instead, they had achieved stability through what could only be described as healthy, respectful fear. Every species now understood that humans were capable of devastating military action, but they also knew that humans preferred peaceful solutions. This combination of fear and hope had created an unprecedented era of galactic cooperation. The Galactic Council now functioned more efficiently than it had in centuries. Disputes were resolved quickly, often with nervous glances toward the human representatives who rarely spoke, but were always listened to when they did. Trade flowed freely along shipping lanes that were now remarkably safe from piracy or territorial conflicts. Humanity had become the galaxy's reluctant guardians, a role they had never sought, but had somehow inherited through the simple act of being too dangerous to ignore and too reasonable to hate. The new galactic order was built on a foundation of controlled fear and mutual respect, where peace was maintained not through treaties or shared ideals, but through the universal understanding that some sleeping giants were better left undisturbed.